Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Allow me to welcome you to the town of Clarkstown. My name is Supervisor George Homan, and we're having this educational seminar for our residents so we can learn a little bit more about the coyote population here in Rockland County and specifically in Clarkstown. So I'd like to welcome you all, maybe just give you a little bit of an overview, just briefly before I introduce our guest speaker. I'll go through the format for the evening. His presentation is going to go about 45 minutes, and we'll have questions afterwards. Also, Officer Pete Walker, our Public Information Officer, is going to give some of the statistics about some of the animal interactions that take place here in the town of Clarkstown. So you'll be able to know how many reportings of sightings of fox and coyote and bear, and how that is kind of handled here by the police department. And then we have our Animal Control Officer, Pat Coleman, who's also here in the back. Who will also be available for some questions and some information as well. Let me just talk briefly about the town of Clarkstown and kind of our local environment for those of you that, for the residents that may be aware, but for those of you that are visiting that are not aware. So Clarkstown is a very unique place. Right here in Rockland County, just to give you the overview about Rockland County, we're the smallest geographical county in all of New York State out of the 62 counties. So we're the smallest, but we actually have 343,000 people that live in Rockland County as of the update to the American Community Survey, which the census does every couple of years. The last update was back in 2015, and so they predict, or they actually indicate that there's 343,000 people that are living in Rockland County. 1/3 of the land area in Rockland County is parkland. It's important to know, you may not realize it, we're 18 miles, from New York City in our own town here in Clarkstown, but 1/3 of the land area in Rockland County is parkland. And if you think about it, all the wonderful parks that have been set aside 100 years ago with the formation of the Palisades Interstate Park System, and Hook Mountain, the High Tor Mountain, and right here in our own town, we have over 700 acres of parkland in our own town, and we have 250 acres of open space in our own town. That's separate and apart from the state park system as well. 14% of the land area of Clarkstown is open space. And again, when you factor in the county, it's slightly higher, almost 1/3 is the parkland. So what does that do? It provides a lot of wildlife corridors that exist that allow animals of all different kinds to live within our community, to interact with human beings within our community, and frankly, to be able to traverse the area. I was talking with Pat Coleman, our Animal Control Officer, and she indicated about 2 years ago, 3 years ago in Ramapo, just on our border, over on Buena Vista Road, one side is Clarkstown, the other side is Ramapo, there was a development. You can actually see it's been built with some large houses off of just north of exit 10 on the Palisades, or exit 11 on the Palisades Parkway. And she said that after that area was built, that there were a lot more reportings of bear sightings beforehand, because obviously there were some bear that were kind of getting in and out through that wooded area because it was adjacent to the Palisades Parkway. So as our habitat within Rockland County changes through development, there's an opportunity for some sightings and for some of these animals to habitat to change and for them to come in closer proximity with human beings. It's important that we kind of start with that, because these habitat corridors, there's something that we recognize and that we understand here in the town of Clarkstown. In fact, when we did our comprehensive plan in 2009, we did something that was unique for any of the municipalities in the area that were doing comprehensive plans. We did two things. We did our comprehensive plan based on the State Environmental Quality Review Act and the elements of that. So we actually did our comprehensive plan as an environmental impact study. And the second thing we did, we had the foresight to actually do a biodiversity study of our town. And we actually know, and I have identified where these wildlife corridors are. And we know where there's going to be animals that are interacting with human beings because of the way in which the town is laid out. In fact, last year, when Suez was going to fence in the reservoir, one of the things that helped us to be able to get them to stop from doing that action was to actually identify and tell them, look, we've done the work already. We know where these animals are, and it's a wildlife corridor. And if you do this, you're going to actually trap animals inside it, and you're going to trap animals outside of it who are going to come in closer proximity to our residents, and we need to be respectful of that, and it's going to become a public safety issue. So again, it's a great place where we live, but we need to understand that even though we live this close to New York City, we have all types of animals that interact with us. And as I said, Officer Walker later on will go through the statistics, the number of calls that our police department gets, and the number of calls that actually result in police reports in terms of interaction, with wildlife. What I want to also point out is, I think the other takeaway from this is we realize that there's just been such improvement, I guess, within the local habitat and within the region, where we actually have animals living here now that never lived here before, or their population is growing, and that's a good thing because it shows that our environment is healthier. This is a photo that was taken by a local resident who gave it over to us in the town. I'll pass it around, a couple of them. And they're beautiful photos of a bald eagle. That bald eagle lives right in West Nyack and actually habitates right around Lake DeForest. Now, I could tell you, being born and raised here, I can't recall seeing bald eagles when I was a kid, but they're here now. We know that they're often, during the colder weather, as they're migrating, that they're often in different parts of Rockland County. If you want to see dozens of bald eagles, go up later in February and in March, up into Haverstraw, right along the bay, and you'll see them nesting up there. Go behind ShopRite in Clarkstown, and you'll see them there as well. But if you want to see permanent residents now of Clarkstown, where some of these bald eagles are staying, they're actually, that eagle's was nesting for 2 of the last 3 years behind houses on Lake DeForest, which is an interesting development for us to be able to have that type of wildlife here. I mentioned earlier too, just as I was talking with some of the folks, even myself, just recently in October, I was driving back from a meeting in Orangetown on Route 9W, and of all things, I'm driving up past Christian Hill Road, and I see a black bear running across the grass and running across Route 9W in front of my car. Last year was an election year, so I'm glad that I didn't kill a black bear, on Route 9W, but a month before the election. But seriously, having lived here my whole life, that's only the second time I saw a black bear. The first time I saw one here was when there was a report of like 3 of them that were mother and 2 cubs that were through the town about 6 or 7 years ago. Again, the point is, we have a lot of wildlife here. We have a lot of people that have fears and concerns about that, and we want to try and allay some of that, and we want to provide some information this evening so that we can better educate the public, so people can understand the wildlife that's here, the habitat that's here, and how they should interact with these animals so that they can best protect themselves, and how that we can ensure that we're preserving our own environment. Again, I want to thank all the folks that kind of worked to put this together. I want to thank especially Pat Coleman, our animal control officer, who was able to reach out to get Frank to be able to come on up and do the presentation. He's coming up from Long Island, and he certainly is an expert in this area. I just want to recognize Pat and everybody. I want to thank Pat. I also want to thank Officer Pete Walker and Chief Ray McCullough from our Clarkstown Police Department. Officer Walker will be talking later on about the statistics here in Clarkstown of all the interactions with fox, bear, animal calls, and coyotes as well. So I want to welcome and thank Officer Walker for his efforts in putting this together as well. And then finally, the staff from my office that worked very hard on this, Erica Machete, our public information specialist in my office, along with Lauren Daly, who's here. We're actually having this out as a Facebook Live event, so there are a lot of folks that had asked about this and inquired about this. So it's on our town Facebook page, and the video will be up on our Facebook page afterwards, so you could get additional information. And finally, I want to thank Frank Vincenti for agreeing to come up and for presenting. Again, what we hope from tonight is that you'll get more information, that you'll understand in a better way what's taking place here in Clarkstown, and certainly get more information, frankly, about the wildlife that's here, specifically this unique species that's here, the coyotes that we know that exist, and will help people take some of the fear away, a little better understanding, and how should you encounter these animals, how you should interact with them, and how you should take care of yourself and take care of them as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Frank, have him speak, and again, he'll go for about 45 minutes. He'll take questions. Towards the end, we'll have Officer Walker go immediately after him just with the police stats, and then we'll take questions at the end. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. I wanted to thank the supervisor and the police department and animal control for allowing me this platform to educate you here in Clarkstown. Grateful that all of you have shown up. There's no shortage of opinions about the animal I'm about to speak about. I'm not looking to win everybody over, but I'm hoping to at least garner somewhat of an understanding so there's less anxiety in coexisting with not only the animal in question, but other wildlife, as the supervisor pointed out. My name is Frank Vincenti. I have this small, not-for-profit wildlife education group, the Wild Dog Foundation. I've been doing this for 2 decades. I still get butterflies, but I speak all over the tri-state area. I've spoken in Pearl River some years ago. I've spoken throughout Westchester County, New York City, and Bergen County, just over the border. My group concentrates on the dog family. I've been involved with wolf conservation, and I speak locally on Long Island about fox. But an animal that takes up much of my time is the animal I'm going to talk to you about tonight. I'm going to be, briefly go over general ecology, and there's just so much information out there anyway, regardless of what I might pitch to you tonight. There's lots of educational groups out there that deal with the coyote and try to foster a coexistence with this animal and other wildlife. As the supervisor was alluding to, you have tremendous biodiversity here in Rockland County. And despite being, in some cases, urban and suburban and even rural, wildlife tends to do very well in these disturbed environments. My group, in particular, we've long educated that the challenge that's facing communities such as yours, which is not unusual. You're not experiencing anything that's unusual or different than other communities, is that could we coexist with wildlife? I mean, we all want to save tigers. We all want to save pandas. We all wanted the wolves brought back out west. Well, most of us. But can we also live with what's in our backyard? And sometimes that's, polarizing and controversial animals as well. But I have faith that we can do it, and hopefully just with meager understanding, that could be accomplished. And it's not going to be without challenges. I'm going to go into some of the challenges that exist in communities with living with the animal that I'm going to speak about, and how it is easy or just common sense. And as long as I've been doing this, and I'm not to diminish the anxiety that some people have, or not to diminish very real conflicts that sadly make the evening news. But as long as I've been doing this, common sense, simple common sense, really goes a long way and mitigates the vast majority of conflicts that take place. As you can see with my brochures, the moniker coy wolf, my group tends to like to use. It's not a totally inaccurate description, but it's certainly not always agreed upon by many. As a distinct species, it is not. It's merely a product of its environment. Coyotes and wolves hybridizing at some point in their history, maybe a little dog genes thrown in there. This animal is merely a production of sadly, human-wrought changes on the environment, whether it's direct persecution or, as the supervisor pointed out, habitat disturbances. But in reality, this is basically a coyote, the eastern version of the animal that's found throughout the United States, and as I show you the map, very widely distributed. Does it have distinct and unique physical attribution? Certainly due to the mixing with wolves and dogs at some point, it certainly does. And if you look at the history of this animal here in the East, it is always brought pondering and questions, because a lot of people just couldn't explain it, certainly until the DNA and genetic work has become more sophisticated, and we've pretty much settled that mystery. The term coy wolf, even though it's not generally accepted, and I make the point that there are no 75-pound coyotes in Rockland County. They're all pretty much coyotes. But the term coy wolf is really not a new term. It's certainly generated some interest recently because of this fascination with hybridization, which is a very real reality throughout the world, not just between wolves and coyotes, but even with bird species and many others, because animals adapt, and closely related animals will try to survive. And in the case of the wolf and coyote, which are very closely related, this is an end result of that. Coy wolves, the term was first coined in the early 70s. A good friend of mine, the late, great Hope Ryden, she was a naturalist author, had written about this in the chapter of her most historic book called God's Dog. Even though she was talking about mostly coyotes from the West, she did have a chapter on these mysterious animals that showed up in the Northeast. Where these researchers were trying to figure out, well, it definitely looks like a coyote, but there is something unique about it. It looks very wolfish, very dog-like, but it's certainly a coyote, and they coined the term coy wolf, which they were onto something, but as a distinct species, it is not. So it's not a Frankenstein experiment that's going on. It's merely Mother Nature at her best, trying to, natural selection. And it's, like I said, hopefully just a somewhat understanding of this animal, create less fear and anxiety. So you have more to fear from me. No, I'm kidding. All right, so, sorry, there we go. I'm on Facebook. My contacts are there. I'm very grateful you all turned up. Feel free to contact me if you have any further questions, or the good people in Clarkstown here that have put on this event. So I'm readily available. There's no ice to be broken, so feel free to contact me. So a lot of people know who this character is. Maybe a younger generation doesn't. But we've long had a fascination with predatory animals since we were hunter-gatherers and such. Certainly when we converted to agriculture and when we domesticated livestock, we sadly began to conflict with many of the predators as they wound up looking for food, and sheep and such like that were much easier to hunt than natural prey. And I highly doubt that Warner Brothers had any degrees in biology or ecology, but just on the general sense, they certainly got the character of Wile E. Coyote very right, because like the Warner Brothers cartoon, the coyote, no matter how you feel about them, and a lot of people have feelings about them, both for and against, they are one of the most persecuted animals in the country. Still active hunting of them. There's still active management practices on public land. So they are highly manipulated. But they are highly intelligent and highly adaptable, and in some cases that also garners some dissatisfaction with them, because as much as they're persecuted, they bounce back and they recover. And that's a lot like Wiley, because in every episode he gets dynamited or he falls off a cliff, and he comes back for the next episode. He's got a great agent, but it's a lot of truth to that cartoon character and the real animal. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat this. They're wild animals. They should be, respected as such. I know there are people that have had very real conflicts, but a little bit of humor eases the tension, or at least for me. As we look at many other carnivores throughout the world, many of them have had a contraction of their range and have become highly endangered. Although we've had the recovery of other carnivore species, like the supervisor was pointing out, you have a recovering black bear population here in New York State that's doing very well. Bobcat populations are doing well. Fisher, if you know what a fisher is, one of our largest weasels here in New York State. And even, with the void of the extirpation of wolves 100 years ago, there was an empty niche that needed to be filled, and this animal has risen to the occasion. Now, coyotes have expanded their range well into the north in Alaska and even as far south as Central America, just highly adaptable. They adapt to every environment. A lot of this, some people have attributed to the elimination of competition, such as wolves and cougars. I tend to disagree somewhat because coyotes do coexist with wolves and cougars out west. So there's no reason why they couldn't try to coexist with them in other ecosystems. A lot of people have said that maybe it's the change of the environments, the cutting down of forests created more open habitats. But coyotes, as you know, especially here in New York State, which has diverse environments, coyotes have adapted to just about every kind of possible environment that the North American continent has. You have them in true desert. You have them in tropical jungles. You have them in high mountain ranges, Arctic type conditions, urban environments like Clarkstown. They adapt to everything. So a lot of this also has to do with the fact that they are, like the cartoon character, highly adaptable and highly recoverable, if that's a word, is that much of the persecution has forced them to breed more so and forced younger animals to strike out and colonize new areas, which just happen to parallel with the extirpation of the wolf or even the cougar in some cases in the east. So, and this has been proven. They've done studies that have showed where the less coyotes are persecuted, the more their populations stabilize. They are dependent on their food sources. They don't breed out of control. The competition between rival coyotes, and this is true with all other carnivores, the competition amongst the similar species keeps their populations in check because there's not a lot of food to share. So, but as we've further, over-persecuted them, over-hunted them, we've created this high reproductive rates and this dispersal into new areas. Now, I'm sure many of you follow wolf conservation, and there's still some controversy over which wolf did exist here in the Northeast. And this has a lot of relevance. I know it's like, well, we came here to listen about coyotes, but to me, wolves and coyotes are parallels, all right? Some people feel a smaller version of the larger gray wolves that you see out in Yellowstone that were recovered recently, a historical recovery program. And some people feel that actually a smaller wolf, a totally different species, all closely related, because wolves and coyotes are very closely related, domestic dogs too. This eastern wolf, or Algonquin wolf, which is still found in parts of southeastern Ontario, of which I'll show you. Now, gray wolves, if you follow Yellowstone, usually are very antagonistic towards coyotes. They view them territorially or as competitors, even though coyotes and gray wolves tend to share the territory together. Coyotes, this is how adaptable that they are. And you could make this comparison to how coyotes have interacted with humans, is that they learn to live with the wolf and how to benefit from the wolf. Wolves make a kill. Coyotes can wait for the wolves to get done, and they lay off. They go off to lay off, and the coyotes will come in and feed. Of course, they have to keep one eye over their shoulder, because if wolves see them feeding on those kills, the wolves will come in and try to chase them off, and if they do catch them, they'll kill them. So with that kind of relationship, researchers have looked to the possibility that coyotes and these smaller eastern wolves might not have such an antagonistic relationship. And in fact, that's what it is. I mean, they're still territorial to each other. In fact, in parts of southeastern Ontario where coyotes and these small Algonquin wolves coexist. They view each other as competitors and as conspecifics, as we call it, where almost like the same species. And they can hybridize with each other and form social units together. But it's, as these wolves become more protected, it's becoming increasingly uncommon. But the point is that the animal that exists here in New York State and even in Rockland County, at some point during that, as you recall my map, as coyotes have spread east within the last 100 to 150 years, they actually did breed with the remnant Algonquin wolves, that smaller wolf. And that was most likely the wolf that existed here in Rockland County during the colonial times. Of course, wolves were long extirpated by the American Revolution in this area. You'd have to go up past Albany and the more remote parts of the state to see wolves back in the 1700s. Not that you would go back there, because you can't tweet back then. But the coyote did indeed hybridize with those smaller Algonquin wolves about 100 or 150 years ago. And this is the area of hybridization that researchers have found, because you have the coexistence between wolves, Algonquin wolves, and coyotes, and there are larger gray wolves a little further north, which tend to mix with the Algonquin wolves as well. So all these genes are getting dispersed. And as this vacant niche here in the Northeast was left for this coyote to fill, they came down here, and with them they brought these genes with them. And of course they've also, and on rare occasions, I'm sure many of you have heard the term coy dog. Again, much like coy wolf, centuries ago when we had mountain lions here in the Northeast, early colonists called them panther, painter, catamount, cougar. So coy wolf, coy dog is pretty much along the same lines, just other names that, local names that are giving to explain these animals that are here. And pay no mind to this misspellings here. I took this off the internet, so whoever did this, they misspelled some Latin names there. But I'm sure you've seen a similar graphic. This is a copy of what the researchers have found to show the genetics of the animals that exist throughout the Northeast, even into the Ohio Valley of Pennsylvania. And even much of the coyotes in the Southeast as well carry a degree of wolf and dog genes too. If you're familiar with wolf conservation, again, the critically endangered red wolves in North Carolina, one of the threats that is perceived is they're mixing with coyotes, of which they do. And some of those wolves do tend to carry coyote genes from this hybridization. But this is the genetic makeup of the animals that you see here in Rockland County. All right, they're predominantly pretty much a coyote. All right, the eastern variety, and they do have a little bit of wolf genes in them, whether it's larger gray wolf genes that are attributed from gray wolves hybridizing with those smaller eastern wolves, and just a little bit of domestic dog. It's important to note that all wolves and coyotes in North America have bred with domestic dogs at some point, even in prehistoric times. Because as people came over from Asia, over the Bering Land Bridge, they naturally brought with them their dogs. And at that time in history, dogs were still somewhat semi-wild, so they may have had the same breeding cycles as wolves and coyotes, and that what attributed to hybridization. You don't see too much coyote dog or wolf dog mixing in the wild, because wolves and coyotes only come into heat once a year, and it's around this time of the year. So dogs, through domestication, have a random breeding cycle. So it's nearly impossible to time those breeding cycles together. So it's not very common. And this is just another graphic of the genetic makeup of the animal. It's mostly coyote, a little bit of eastern wolf, gray wolf genes, and just, even though that dog is much larger than any coyote, just a little bit of dog genes. And you see this pronounced inheritance from wolves and even from dogs in the skull structure of eastern coyotes. All right, on the right is a coyote from the Northeast, And on the left is a Western Coyote, which is much smaller. And again, this is not Frankenstein's monster. These are not 300-pound coyotes out there, stalking the woods. They're still pretty much coyotes. On the large scale, males tend to be larger than females. You'll have a large male coyote that could be in the high 40s, 45, 48 pounds. But anything over that, I would say, is a wolf and deserves federal protection if anything was to happen. But you could see the inheritance of dogs and wolves. And also from hybridization, with the influence of the dog and the wolf, you'll have this variation in colors too in coyotes in the east, which you don't find out west. Predominantly in Rockland County, you have this reddish brown color. You might have more of a grayish color. Even more, another coloration that's common is this blondish coloration, and even more rare, and we see this more further up in New York State, some black colored animals, which certainly may have been direct descendants of a dog-coyote mix, if it happens. Now this is, I like this slide because this actually shows people that the same animal could look very different from one season to the next. And this, unfortunately, is where, people will be saying that, oh, I have a 100-pound coyote in my yard. And in reality, if it's during the winter, it would be an animal in its thick winter coat, and they appear much larger than they really are. And when they shed that winter coat, they look very sleek, like greyhounds. This picture is provided by two colleagues of mine, Eastern Coyote Research in Massachusetts and Coyote Watch Canada up in Canada. This is their photographs, and it's great comparisons to animals at different seasons and how people could be confused thinking that they have a much larger animal than it really is. And then I'll always get people that say, oh, those coyotes look very straggly, but it's really just them molting and shedding that winter coat. Now, you've probably heard a lot of explanations for coyotes, in regards to their family structure, and there are some that feel that coyotes are not as social as many of us know that they are. Coyotes are basically little wolves. They live in the same kind of social structure and family group that wolves do. There's the breeding pair, or alpha male and female. There may be one or two or even three helpers from a previous litter that will stay on and help their parents raise that year's pups. All right, not all these animals are going to survive. Things happen. They get hit by cars, of which I'll show you. Competition with rival packs decreases the amount of food available, and coyotes don't survive. But they are highly adaptable, and they're highly social. They are monogamous. Coyotes are only stay together with their mates until tragically maybe something happens. One of the few mammals that are true monogamous. And like I said, this time of the year is the breeding season, so you might hear them, especially here in Rockland, they might be more vocal. You'll hear them howling and everything, and that's really not pertaining to you. It's really to tell rival coyotes, this is our territory, this is my mate, stay away, don't trespass, all right? So this is a good comparison here. These are coyotes from the Rocky Mountains in Yellowstone, and these are eastern coyotes. So you could see pretty much coyote, but you could see more of the broad features of eastern coyotes, not monsters, but more of that wolf and dog-like influence as opposed to the western variety. And within 62 days, because coyotes have the same gestation as domestic dogs, the alpha female, breeding female, would look for a den to have her pups. All right, so around sometime in March or maybe early April. Okay, this is a natural coyote den, especially here in the Northeast. They will either take a old fox den or even a woodchuck den and enlarge it where the alpha female could get into and give birth to a pups. And only the alpha female goes into the den. No other members of the pack will go in there. So people always ask me, well, do coyotes hibernate? I said, no. They'll ask me, well, what do they do during the cold winter? I says, well, they're out there. They could handle it. unless they're suffering from some skin condition. They certainly could take even, we're in this heat wave right now, and I guarantee you that many of the coyotes here in Rockland County are probably worried about overheating because they were used to those minus temperatures last week, which coyotes could adapt to no problem. And tolerate, but now it's kind of warm out there, so even the deer are probably not, as active as they would have been. And once those pups are born, they could be anywhere from 2 to 8 pups. That's 8 is along the large size, but they average about 4 to 6. Okay, there's been incidents where 12 pups have been born, and again, not all these pups are going to survive, but what the size of litters has been directly attributed to the amount of nutrition that female coyotes could acquire. So if they wind up having, lots of prey to feed on the year previously, they could have a pretty healthy litter, a pretty good litter. And also, unfortunately, the overhunting also contributes to these large litters, because what happens is the more adults that are killed in a population, the less competition there is for adults. So that means that there's more food available for those surviving adults. You following me? All right? And those surviving adults, because they have so much to eat, if the female becomes pregnant, she will have that added nutrition to probably have a large litter. And that's why, if you look at, remember the slide of how coyotes have expanded, that's why the persecution, the overhunting, has created this super coyote, coyotes that regularly adapt to any kind of pressure, any kind of manipulation. And they do that by recovering their populations very quickly, whether it's through larger litters, fewer adults to compete with, and they have more success, ironically. So here's a coyote pup about 3 weeks old. His eyes and ears are starting to open, much like domestic dogs. Here's one about 4 or 5 weeks old. Here's the pup's curiosity coming out of the den. And a den doesn't have to be like I showed you before, especially here in the Hudson Valley. You have these huge granite outcrops. They tend to make good den sites. They tend to keep their temperature when the female gives birth in the den. They also tend to stay dry. And they're also very good because bears can't dig out the puppies. So they make great den sites. But I've seen coyotes denning in some unusual places. They usually like to den far and far off from people. Foxes tend to be a little like, oh, I'll den in your yard as long as you don't bother me. But coyotes tend to be a little more wary. Like I said before, I speak all over the tri-state area, and some years ago I speak often in Bergen County, and I spoke in the town of Closter, if that's the right name. They had an incident where coyotes had taken up in a doghouse to have their pups. And the reason being was it was highly unusual, and the explanation and the fact is that this was a foreclosed home, so there was no human activity. Again, going back to the fact that coyotes want nothing to do with us. All right, they'd much rather den far off in the woods and not be disturbed. If they do get disturbed, the female will move her pups to an alternative den site, no different than fox and wolves. Excuse me. But these coyotes wound up denning in this doghouse, of which I have a picture on my group's Facebook page. And the New Jersey Fish and Game did the correct advocacy in saying, just board it up. And not with her in it, naturally. But the homeowner that eventually bought the home boarded it up, and the coyotes didn't have access to that. And they actually went back into the woods to find an appropriate den, so to speak. A lot of reasoning, too, for the fact that that was an ideal spot for them. Just a little sidebar is that that was, I guess, 2014. We had a lot of snow that winter, if anybody recalls. A lot of the countryside was inundated with snow, and as that snow started to thaw out, it flooded a lot of places, which unfortunately we're going to get tomorrow with the rain. So a lot of the appropriate denning areas were inundated with water, so that doghouse was nice and dry, but they wound up going somewhere else. 5 weeks old, no different than domestic dogs, and again, they're wild animals. I'm not portraying them as a pet or anything else, because they are not pets, all right? But they do have the same development as domestic dogs because they are closely related. A little bit of puppy tumbling here where, you know, an alpha pup is showing its sibling that it's going to be a future pack leader, okay? A little bit of jaw wrestling there. Very, very similar to domestic dogs. Now, those pups that survive as the summer goes on, you know, and the summer could be a tough time, even though coyotes are highly adaptable and versatile. Once I get to diets, you'll see. Not all these pups are going to survive. I mean, there are other predators for pups. Certainly, we don't have any here, but in other parts of the country, golden eagles prey on coyote pups. As you know, out west, wolves will try to dig coyote pups out. Bears. Coyotes are very diligent. They're very good parents. Any kind of disturbance at the den, a rival animal, not so much us. I've approached coyote dens, and I have all my appendages. So, you know, rival animals such as a bear tries to dig out coyote pups, those parents will certainly come in and try to nip that bear in the rump, get it to move off, because they're trying to protect their babies. But, you know, some of those pups are not going to make it. But those that do, you know, if they get to late summer, which is also a critical time for coyote puppies because the diets tend to change and the availability of certain animals tends to disappear because other baby animals are maturing too. And those that have survived know how to evade predators. So this late summer is a critical time for both wolf and coyote pups. But the ones that do survive, they'll bring them to a rendezvous site, of which we call it, or a home site, and that could be an open area. Unfortunately, in an urban environment, it could be a field that may border a school, all right, where the pups just languish there for the whole day as the parents go and sleep it off, or the parents go and hunt. You know, they need a break too. You know, the curiosity and inquisitive of pups could get them into trouble. They could either wind up on a road and get hit by a car. They could wind up in someone's yard, all right, and maybe look for pet food that's put out. You could still, it's so easy to scare them off. I've scared off coyote pups, and I mean, look at me, I scare everything. But I've scared off coyote pups numerous occasions, even in the presence of their parents, and chased them all off. So even at this stage, if a coyote pup winds up in your yard, as cute as it is to some people, not everybody, discourage it, scare them off. Go outside, make noise, even walk towards them. At this age, they will run off. And they will learn that and retain that. And they'll know next time not to. Sort of like the Peter Rabbit story. You know, remember Peter Rabbit? You kids don't know Peter Rabbit, do you? It's before your time. You know, when the mother rabbit tells Peter not to go into Farmer Brown's yard because Farmer Brown, and then he had to experience it for himself, but he learned his lesson, Peter Rabbit. Coyotes do too. Now, as we get into the fall, all right, those pups that have survived as well start to look more and more adult-like. And here's a great picture of a local eastern coyote. This animal's from Pennsylvania. And you can see the very wolfish, dog-like features on it, which confused many people in the past. That they, well, you know, it does look coyote, it does look like a coyote, but it is unique. It is distinct in some ways. It's not a separate species. It's still a coyote. But, you know, those inherited genes from wolves and dogs play a lot into its physicality. So some of those pups from the previous year, you know, they're tired of taking care of their younger brothers and sisters. They're going to move off on their own and disperse on their own, try to find territory or maybe even a mate on their own. So that's what you'll have there during the fall. And again, like I said, this is the breeding time for them here in Rockland. So you'll hear more vocalizations. Coyote howling is the same thing as wolf howling. It's a territorial display. It's a rallying cry coming together. It's also the joy of it. This is the coyote beetles right here. So nobody liked those, Joe? All right. I'm trying to lighten it up a little, but it's nothing more, nothing less. You know, their vocalizations are not geared towards us. All right, it's actually geared towards other coyotes and telling them, you know, to avoid that territory. Now, what do coyotes eat, especially here in the Northeast? Coyotes throughout the East are fairly consistent with what they eat. And a lot of the time, coyotes will have a varied diet of what they may prey on. All right? For the most part, they do hunt small mammals, all right? No different than the fox, okay? But coyotes are also more versatile, ironically. Foxes are the quintessential canine mouser. I'm sure you've seen those videos where foxes are mousing in Yellowstone. They take this flying leap and land headfirst into the snow, and they come up with a vole. That's what this is, a vole. All right. Coyotes do it, not as neat. All right. They're a much larger, heavier animal, so they're not as athletic as the foxes. Foxes would ace the U.S. Olympic team. Coyotes, even though they're very fast and athletic, but in the mousing category, coyotes are not as good as fox. But they are successful, as you can see. Here, it's a couple of coyotes that are mousing, pouncing on rodents, and coming up with the prize. Now, in relation to the Hudson Valley, I don't know if any of you have heard, but they've ongoing studies in looking into the rates of Lyme disease and Lyme disease, people acquiring Lyme disease and how it correlates to the environment and the health of the environment, like the supervisor was touching on before. The vector of Lyme disease tends to be not this animal, this is a vole, but white-footed mice and even chipmunks. And while there's many other reasons for the increase in Lyme disease, a lot of it is, temperature, mild winters. A lot of it has been attributed to the acorn crop, which ironically boosts rodent populations. Having these predators of small mammals, because we've created ample habitat for rodents by, ironically, less forest. The more urbanization, it creates that edge habitat that rodents tend to thrive in. And this is what has attributed a lot of these diseases that have jumped to us. Lyme disease, in some cases hantavirus, not here, but in the Southwest. And it's the elimination of predators, and it's the lack of appreciation in the role that these animals could do to create a healthy ecosystem, not only in general, but healthier for us. And of course, it's not without conflict for us, of which I'll get into. But definitely an asset, like the supervisor pointed out, that having a healthy environment and a complete environment with these predators. In more urban environments, maybe in parts of Rockland County that's more urbanized, rats are a big part of their diet if they do tend to inhabit more 5 more minutes? 10 more minutes? Oh, okay. More urbanized environments and with squirrels. But there's a study in Chicago that showed rats to be a big part of their diet. Birds, especially here in fragmented habitats, geese, some ground nesting birds, though coyotes may tend to benefit some ground nesting birds by keeping animals like raccoons and even feral cats away from these vulnerable birds that are nesting on the ground. Woodchucks, groundhogs, if you want to call them, very sizable prey, cottontail rabbits. All right, and more controversial is the interaction with deer. Now, you have to remember that deer are the most abundant large mammal in the Northeast. So it's natural that predators will have them in their diet, in many cases, in abundance, because especially down here, you'll have many deer that are hit by cars, deer that are wounded in some way, or arthritic deer, older deer that, because there's not so much natural selection. So coyotes will benefit from preying on that, and other predators, black bear. Fawns are important during certain times of the year because it's timed when those pups are born, so it's a ready source of protein to feed those pups. But many fawns do survive. A lot of the overbrowsing attributes to fawn predation, how vulnerable fawns are. So the fawns need a lot of this undergrowth to hide. So when deer wind up overeating a place, they actually make themselves more vulnerable to predators because they can't hide their fawns. Here, adult deer are pretty much immune to coyotes unless they're scavenging roadkill or it's an animal that's injured. Here's a doe with a maternal instinct chasing a coyote off. Here's one with a coyote and the doe are just minding their own business, although the doe looks like it's stomping its foot there as a warning. And coyotes are are omnivores. At certain times of the year, they could depend solely on berries and vegetation. Anything they could chew is what one cowboy used to say. Uh, Raccoons. Raccoons are not a prey item, but they're a competitor. They tend to avoid coyotes in most cases. Sadly, raccoons tend to be vectors of rabies and distemper. So that on very rare that coyotes get rabies, but it has happened on occasion. But they are vulnerable to distemper because of the abundance of raccoons. Raccoons are only vectors because they're so abundant. Cats, and my apologies for the graphicness of this slide. All studies have shown that cats rarely even register on the diet of coyotes. So we don't give cats enough credit of their intelligence and their ability to avoid predators. And they do learn how to avoid coyotes. I had experience with cats and coyotes in Queens where it was like the Serengeti, where the cats just avoided when the coyotes were active, and when the coyotes weren't active, the cats came out. Some cats know how to deal with coyotes. You know, they'll bluff them, so to speak. But keeping cats indoors is the best way. Do not overfeed feral colonies. Try to limit the amount of food you put out. So here's a fox. You don't attract other wildlife. You could still feed those cats if you're taking care of a colony. I'm not opposed to subsistence hunting, putting food on your table, because that's what the coyote does. But some of the overmanagement of coyotes does cause ecological problems. There's a constant turnover. A lot of this may even affect urban environments, because as these social groups are broken up, there's more transient coyotes, coyotes that are unattached to a social unit, and they wind up looking for new places to go. They're usually inexperienced animals. They could get into conflict more easily, much like the slide earlier of the dispersal of coyotes. Roadkill, mange. Mange in coyotes in Rockland County is there. It's not very common, more common in fox. But mange does happen in coyotes. It's a microscopic mite. It's highly contagious. Coyotes can transfer it to each other. The density of coyotes and their territoriality between each other actually lessens the amount of these diseases getting spread. And I know this is something relevant to Rockland. You had an incident some years ago, I guess it was in South Nyack or something, where a sickly coyote had gone after a dog, and the owner had tried to correctly try to break it up. And unfortunately, I don't think I spoke to New York State Department of Health. They said she really wasn't bit. She just had bodily fluids on her that they were concerned about. Correct me if I'm wrong.
She was bit.
She was bit?
She called me at work. I work full-time.
Oh, all right, even better.
She's a co-worker.
All right.
She called me, told me she wasn't coming in. I called her a liar.
Oh.
In a good way, but that
Right.
we believe ingested a
Right,
we had it the night before.
right. Another vector animal.
It was becoming twilight nighttime.
Right,
We had permission from DEC,
right,
but it was looking right at the Palisades Parkway, so
right.
I had to let him go that night.
Yeah, but rabies, other than that incident, rabies is amazingly very rare in New York State coyotes. You know, including that incident and several other incidents that ironically have happened recently. And this is only because of wildlife doing well, people being active and such, and maybe the change in weather patterns, that animals are interacting more. Much of the rabies incidents have happened within the last 5 years, but I believe from New York State Department of Health, the records of rabies in coyotes for the last 75 years has been less than 25 animals, which is very, very low. You should be aware of rabies. Animal control and you as well do a great job in educating, vaccinating pets. Don't interact with strange animals, but it's very rare that coyotes would get it. Coexisting with us, living close to us, all right? And I think Officer Walker, this would be a perfect time for you to, I don't want to, in Italian it's called gaccheron, means that learn when to be quiet.
All right. Good evening. Thanks very much for attending tonight. So the supervisor had asked me to come up and give a little brief on the numbers. So part of my job within the police department is the records officer. So we basically keep track of all the data and all the responses that we utilize during the year in the police department. So in the calendar year of 2017, the Clarkstown Police Department responded to 485 calls for service for animals other than dog complaints that generated a police report. Of those calls, the breakdowns were as follows. 12 calls were for coyote, 23 for fox, and 13 for bear. As you can see by these numbers, approximately 2.5% of the 485 calls that we responded to involved coyotes. In the last 5 years, our animal control officer has investigated one incident in which a coyote killed a household pet. As far back as we keep data, we have had no incidents in which a coyote attacked or killed a human being. In regards to animal issues, so obviously 485 calls for service, there's plenty more sightings. People probably saw a coyote within the last couple of days, or a fox, or a raccoon or something. That doesn't mean that people are calling the police department every time they see these animals. These are just incidents, and this rose to the level where the officer that responded to the call decided to create a report for whatever reason. Maybe it was near a school or a playground, or maybe the animal was observed to be showing characteristics of rabies. So in order to trigger other agencies to help us in the response, we'll generate a police report. But basically, for our residents that are within the town of Clarkstown, we ask them to please reach out to our animal control officer, McCoy Coleman, and her direct line is 639-5888. I have this pamphlet in the back. You can take one on the way out. She basically has been our animal control officer for the last 36 years. She is a wealth of knowledge, not only of animals, but of this area, of the town of Clarkstown, of Rockland County. So she also works in conjunction with, we have an animal control officer from the town of Orangetown as well as the town of Haverstraw. So obviously they're in constant contact with each other. And if they see patterns or something developing, they know that they can contact the DEC or the Department of Health or whoever they need to contact to ensure that we're handling this situation as quickly as possible. The most important thing for the police department is giving real-time access to the residents and the people within the town of Clarkstown. And the way we do that best is through social media. As you can see here tonight, we're sitting here, Lauren from the town supervisor's office and myself from the police department. We're Facebook Living this entire session. We have a social media platform that we're very proud of. We put a lot of time and effort into it. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and we also have a town website, and under the town website, the police department has its own website. We ask you that, to at least like and follow those social media platforms, because if we get a call of a sighting of, let's say, a black bear in Upper Nyack, and right away parents' concerns are schools, playgrounds, right? Their children are in school. Well, what we're doing is we're providing real-time information, and what we're trying to do is just make you aware and quell the fear. As I just told you, data speaks volumes. We've had no incidents in which any animal has attacked a human within the town of Clarkstown in regards to the coyote or the fox or the bear. So we're very lucky, but what we like to do is keep people aware, alert, and informed. And we feel that this is the best way to do this. So if you would please take an opportunity, if you are on social media, this is a great way to gather information. So if I'll be available for questions after, but I'll turn the mic back over to Frank. Thank you.
I can't say it enough. I think the town of Clarkstown is fantastic in doing this, and you're very lucky to have such proactive people in government. I might even move up here, and now you'll have to deal with me forever. But I'm all kidding aside, very much accolades to this community, and it's your leadership here and all of you for coming out. Even if you don't agree with me, or you know, some of you may leave here still not appreciating having coyotes around, but at least you have learned something, and you have these great leaders here that provided for you. And I don't get paid for this. I don't want to get paid. I want to come and help, and I'm more than happy to help great accommodating communities such as Clarkstown. I don't get many accommodating communities, trust me. All right, so I'm public enemy number 2, Coyote's public enemy number 1. So, but I'm very grateful to you. But getting back to this, you know, the coyotes do adapt to living in proximity to us. And even in these scenarios, an important note is that coyotes out during the day is not unusual. Coyotes could be active at any time, especially in an urban area if they get disturbed while they're resting up or laying up from the previous night's hunt. They'll be like this coyote crossing the street, or even coyotes wandering in between homes. If you don't, I don't know how the homes are situated here. If you have a lot of fenceless properties, you know, wildlife is going to come through there. They don't have any barriers. I mean, fences do make good barriers to keep animals out, and coyotes, they're good jumpers. Deers too. I have a herd of deer in my yard in Suffolk County, which I enjoy. I don't think my neighbors do, but I let my dogs out. I always go outside with my dogs, and I'm going to get to, and I don't have coyotes, so let the dogs out to go to the bathroom, and deer went right over my 6-foot fence, just like that. It was incredible. My dog didn't even notice it. But, you know, they will adapt to us and live close to us. And even in situations like this, what I recommend, even though it might be deemed inappropriate that coyotes are this comfortable, all right, and this is a common thing, okay, especially in urban environments, if they tend to get this comfortable, all right, you could partake in what we call hazing. I like to call it deterring, or trying to revert their behavior, make them uncomfortable. And it could be done humanely. It could be done in an invasive way that's not harmful to the animal. My mode, and it's not everybody's mode, there are lots of great groups out there that advocate for certain protocols and certain methods. I tend to walk at them or even run at them, and that works. They'll run away from me. All right. And the beauty about having a situation like this is that you could chase that coyote from between the homes, and that coyote just wants to get away. And they're not going to know that you gave up chasing them. They just want to get away. In a more open environment like this, unfortunately, you know, the curiosity of them may take a little more doing. Like people may have to push them to the edges to get them out of the open. A lot of the times, it's just a meager yelling or clapping your hands. I gave a talk in Westchester. I've spoken over 30 times in Westchester. And one person, and it doesn't have to be so complicated. It could be very easy, very innate. All right, that one resident said that they saw a coyote and they yelled at it, "Hey!" and the coyote ran off. But yet they wanted to know if there was anything further. And I said, what you did was fine. What you did was enough. That coyote learned. Probably nobody ever in that community ever yelled at it before. And a lot of times this is the tragedy. And I see this over and over again, whether it's in Westchester or New Jersey, where a lot of the deterring is so easy and common sense, but most people don't do it. And coyotes wind up getting more and more comfortable, more and more bolder. And then, you know, the town hall meetings where thankfully, I don't know if all of you were frisked before you came in here. Nobody threw any, people are throwing things, people are angry, and understandably, it never has to get to that point. You know, if people just, sorry about that, coyote. You know, if people just took some common sense procedures. And I know this is unnerving for some people. People have a built-in, some people do, anxiety about wildlife. Coyotes may, you know, portray that anxiety to people. I personally do not find them threatening at all. I've interacted with them on many occasions. But I understand that some people don't have that in them. Some groups have very passive-aggressive methods where you could rattle a can or use an air horn or even spray a hose at them, which even the state likes to do. I've done talks with the DEC, and they always recommend spraying a hose. I'm going to their house during the summer. But when I worked with the Bergen County Animal Control, they had a great, I mean, you know, it's hot out, so they have the hose and like the sprinkler. Now you got the joke? Bergen County Animal Control actually advises, and this may be prohibitively expensive for some people, is there's a sprinkler that's triggered when animals walk into the yard. So if coyotes come into the yard, it triggers this sprinkler, they get sprayed, and they run off. So there's a whole host of methods to prevent animals from getting comfortable. This is Don't Do It 101. All right, and I just experienced trying to prevent these sort of things in the borough of Queens, which unfortunately got a family of 10 coyotes killed. While I tried to prevent this habituation, people still partook in doing it. This is a death sentence for all wildlife. Bears, right? You know, we accept a fed bear is a dead bear. Don't feed the bears. We've learned our lessons from bears. Yet, amazingly, with the psychology of the public, we look at bears and we think teddy bear, and bears could be far more problematic than a coyote. A coyote is, a timid animal and could be scared off. These people are contributing to poor behavior, bold behavior, problematic behavior, and like Officer Walker was saying, incidents between people and coyotes are very, very rare. All right, you have more chance of being struck by lightning, hit by a Mack truck, winning the lotto, and dating Brad Pitt all on the same day than getting bit by a coyote. Only a few of you laughed. This behavior contributes to this behavior where coyotes start to approach people for handouts. All right, even at this stage, and I've done this with problematic coyotes, you could still divert them. All right, it doesn't have to be a death sentence. Of course, when an animal winds up tragically biting somebody, it's agreed upon that that animal gets removed. All right, but even at this stage, you could divert them. You could teach them otherwise. Even if you have to be aggressive, even if you have to, in some ways, tag them with something, throw something at them, all right? Get them to get out of that mode. This family, unfortunately, they have a child here. This coyote is approaching them for food. They're actually throwing food to him. You can see it's eating something. This guy should be ticketed and fined, all right? They should all get up, chase that animal off. It could still, have a happier ending. Don't feed coyotes. Don't feed other wildlife. Sometimes, more so with bears, because bears, coyotes are attracted to bird seed, but bears certainly are attracted to bird seed even more so. Birds are sloppy eaters. A lot of the seed falls on the floor, so that attracts rodents and that attracts the predators. Certainly keep that clean. Or some people from the state have even advised getting rid of bird feeders, but I know how popular they are, and I like the birds too. So it's almost unfeasible to tell people to not have bird feeders. But just be aware of how that contributes to the environment and maybe even contributes to problematic behavior with other animals. It's very rare that coyotes eat garbage, but if they become conditioned to it and they see it as an asset, they could certainly gravitate to it. You could still divert them from that behavior. Now, the major conflict between coyotes and these urban and suburban environments are their interactions with pet dogs. Now, I'm a dog owner, as you know. I'm very empathetic and sympathetic to pet owners, and this is a very real situation. It's a situation that's manageable, though. All right? In lots of cases, coyotes view dogs as other dogs view dogs, in a territorial sense. All right? It's nothing more, nothing less. All right? For the most part, coyotes seem to tolerate dogs for much of the year, whether it's just happens to be during the winter where people are less active and less out. All right? The winter incidents tend to be fewer. These incidents tend to occur most often during the spring and summer when those puppies are born. And that's when coyotes become highly territorial. You could still prevent those situations. Now, you're going to see a theme in the next couple of photographs, and I've tried to include every possible incident that may take place between coyotes and dogs, especially in an urban and suburban environment, because that is, reality of, this is part of the challenge of coexisting with them. Again, territoriality, off-leash dog. All right? I don't know what the ordinance is here, Pat, that dogs should be leashed. Right. There's a reason for that. Mostly it's for the safety of the dog. It's for the safety of the public. All right. So dogs don't jump up on somebody and lick them after rolling through the mud. All right. But a lot of it too is good where it prevents much conflict with wildlife. All right. And most of the incidents involving dogs and coyotes that I've looked into throughout Westchester and New Jersey, and I'm sure you could tell me better here in Rockland County, much of it has to do with off-leash dogs, where coyotes are becoming territorial, and that's not being separate from incidents at homes, which I'm going to get into, but I'm talking about in town or county parks or state parks, where I don't know what the leash laws are for a lot of these parks, but off-leash dogs tend to get into these conflicts with coyotes. Again, not very common. Very active parks, the human activity tends to keep coyotes shy. But during the spring and summer when there's vulnerable pups, and especially in late summer when puppies start to move with their parents, the parents get very territorial and anxious about the presence of dogs. You could divert this situation. You know, the homeowner should, or the dog owner should chase that coyote off, try to prevent this conflict. Certainly leash that dog up quickly. And forget about coyotes. You have porcupine here, all right? You have skunk, like you were talking about before. Skunks spray dogs very often, all right? And, an off-leash dog getting into a fight with a porcupine is going to get a mouthful of quills, which is highly painful for the dog. But this is a preventable situation. If dogs are off leash and they come close to a den, again, that territoriality, like I said earlier with the bear trying to dig out the coyote pups, dogs are innocent in this. Dogs are not necessarily causing the trouble either. But if a dog comes too close to a den, coyotes will try to move them off, shoo them off. All right? Sometimes, and this has happened often, if you're on a trail, again, an off-leash dog, and even if a dog is leashed, coyotes may appear on the trail, and this is a normal, natural behavior that coyotes are exhibiting, all right? It's what they're focused on is the dog, all right? And then if you're walking your dog, of course, keep it leashed. You make your presence known, because coyotes are zeroed in on the dog. They don't know that the human's there, even if you're not too far behind your off-leash dog. You have to show those coyotes that you're there, that the human is there. And that will get them out of that focus on the dog, all right? In this situation, a lot of people have misinterpreted this situation. And if you're a fan of Jack London books, he tended to embellish it a lot about the wolves, all right? Wolves and coyotes, to be honest with you, and again, I'm not sugarcoating it, no predator wants to risk injury, all right? If predators get hurt, they can't hunt. All right? Despite the fact that they have teeth and claws, they can't hunt. So this is a bluff. Coyotes are trying to show that dog, hey, don't come any further. This is what they would do to other coyotes. What they would do to wolves is, hey, don't come any further. This is a situation where you leash the dog up. You could chase them off if you feel lucky that day, or you could just turn around and walk the other way. Let it be. All right? But this is not a case of luring. Coyotes don't lure dogs into the woods and kill them. What happens is an off-leash dog, you can see the excitability of the dog, tail is up. Dogs are dogs, all right? They see the coyotes, they chase them. Maybe the coyote runs off into the woods to get away. Maybe the rest of the family group is there. Oh, who's chasing Joey? It's a Long Island coyote, all right? And then they partake in the territoriality. So, but this is a preventable thing. I'm almost done. Sometimes dogs are the aggressors. Again, keep your dogs leashed. There are incidents, I'm sure some of you have heard, maybe it's happened to some of you. And again, I'm here to help you. So I'm interested in your stories. Vent on me if you want. You let the dog out to go to the bathroom, all right? And you don't have a fenced property. Coyotes walking through, the dog is let out. There's an incident, all right? What I recommend is, and again, very minute lifestyle changes, not very invasive. You know, it's not, you know, more taxes or whatever. It's just common sense, again. Go out before your dog if you have a fenceless property. Make a lot of noise. Make your presence known. Always go out with your dogs. Like I said, I go outside with my dogs, and I don't have coyotes. I have people that steal dogs, but I don't have coyotes. And I always go outside with my dogs. They relieve themselves. I take them inside. All right? And, you know, tragically, and I see this in many communities I speak at, if I'm there, like today, much too early, all right, where fenceless property, electric collars, dog is outside on the lawn by itself, no supervision. Porcupine or skunk comes through the yard, or even, like in this instance, a coyote. Unsupervised dog. Most large dogs, you know, they tend to be, you know, pretty safe with coyotes. But small breed dogs, as I'm going to show you, small breed dogs could be very, very vulnerable. Again, another off-leash dog in a town park, all right? Keep the dogs leashed. If you see coyotes, scare them away. When you have your dog leashed, I always recommend, I'm sure Pat and my other, you're with animal control too? Or? All right. Thanks for coming. I'm sure you will agree, 4 to 6 foot leashes, mandatory when walking a dog. Reason being, you have control. The animal is close to you. I'm not trying to look like Cesar Millan. I'm about as tall as him, but that's the extent of it, if you know who he is. You have control of that dog. So if wildlife, or even another dog, an off-leash dog, and I know we were talking about that, comes towards your dog, you have control of your dog, and you could rectify the situation either through aggression, chase that animal off, deter it, kick the dog away, or whatever, but you have control. Those leashes that go 30 or 40 feet, on Long Island, we had a dog killed by a car, not by coyote, by a car because of that long leash. The dog walked off the curb and got hit by a car. 4 to 6 foot leashes, you have control of that situation. And again, when coyotes see that attachment, in my experience, because I've had this experience, when the coyote sees that attachment with the dog, now they see the human, and they're like, wait a second, all right, that's a human. And they go, and you could deter them. You get them out of that focus of the dog, because that's what they're zeroed in on, and you chase them off, throw something at them, yell at them. A lot of times it's just yelling, right? And they get that, knocks them out of the zone. They're in the zone, and then they run off. But you have to have that control. So, again, well, there I'm repeating myself. My wife's going to complain I'm repeating myself. Very rare incidents where, I mean, this is a wolf, and this is a food-habituated wolf. Similar behavior to coyotes, all right, where they would approach a dog on a leash, very rare. But again, look at what this guy is doing. His friend, he's chasing that animal off. It's very easy to do, common sense stuff to do. So, well, I'm glad many of you stayed, and you didn't like my jokes, but you all seem somewhat amicable, so I guess I'll get the heat now. So I hope I won some of you over. Thanks.
So we're going to take some questions. I do want to have Pat Coleman come up and just offer a few comments as well. And again, I want to thank Pat for finding Frank and providing the opportunity here. And also, as we had the sign-in sheet going around, everybody that attended will send information out. We're getting some additional information from the New York State DEC that we'll send out about coyotes, and we'll send out the additional information here that was presented tonight. The police department statistics. Again, I just want to reiterate what Officer Walker indicated, and Pat just mentioned to me earlier. It was 5 years ago next month was the last time we had an incident in Clarkstown that was reported to the police with a pet that was attacked by a coyote. So it's 5 years ago. It's not like there's something that's is an ongoing concern. And if you look at the numbers don't lie. It doesn't mean that we're not getting it. There's not other reports. You know, again, as I said, I mentioned to you earlier that a black bear ran in front of me. I never reported that to the police, because it wasn't an incident, but it happened. And as I said, I think it was only the second time in my life that I was in close proximity to a black bear. The first time was when there's this family of 3 bears that actually climbed over my fence, went through my backyard in Nanuet and climbed back over the other side. And we'll have that. You'll know that during the springtime in certain parts of the year. What's that?
What's a trespassing?
Yeah, right. The evidence of that is that I still have a bent bar on the top of my fence from when the heavy bear went over it. But I do want to thank Pat. I want to thank Frank. Pat's going to give a little more information very briefly, and then everybody will take comments. And as I said, please sign the sign-in sheet, and we'll provide additional information for you as well. Pat?
I can't believe we had such a good turnout. I'm so happy. It's amazing that Frank, he volunteered to come up, and police department and our supervisor's office, they allowed it, and I hope there's some good questions out here. But when we discussed about leashes, we do have a leash law, and my concern for your pets are these invisible fences. If you have an invisible fence, do not let your dog out when it's dark. And even during the day when the coyotes can be around, go out, do what Frank said, make some noise, look around, just don't let the dog out. When we've had a lot of snow, our 4-foot fences become 2-foot fences, which makes it much easier for the animals to get in a yard, and they're sneaky. So if your dog is acting a little strangely, don't let him go out by himself unsupervised, even if you have a fenced-in yard. So we want to be prepared. When I get calls about the coyotes and the small dogs, I sense people concerned about the coyotes grabbing their dogs, but unfortunately, we've had a few incidents where in West Nyack we had a Chihuahua grabbed by either an owl or a hawk in the evening. And fortunately, Tinkerbell was a little on the chubby side, so she survived the attack. But I've had people send me pictures of the different coyotes in the area. I like to nickname them because we have one that I nicknamed Frankenstein because he does look like somebody put him together. His head doesn't fit his body, and he annoyed people from Congers to Valley Cottage. So pictures are wonderful, and if you have questions, are they questions for Frank? Okay.
Start over there and we'll work our way this way.
You have to name him Frankenstein. Not doing the coy wolf term any favors. I'm kidding.
How can you tell if a fox or a coyote is rabid?
Well, my animal control experts are certainly qualified to do that. Rabies, as you may agree, sometimes it's hard to discern as canine distemper, which is more common, mimics rabies. What I've seen with coyotes, and I have no direct experience with a rabid coyote, is they could appear perfectly normal. They could look highly confused. Their ears might be lowered. They might be walking wobbly as rabies affects the brain. Canine distemper is a different virus altogether. It affects the brain as well. Like, I guess you could tell me better too, like with the incident in Orangetown, is that sometimes animals, I hate to put you on the spot, man, but sometimes, rabid animals, especially, it's important to note, and certainly Pat could certainly attribute to it too, is that rabies with the dog family tends to affect them in that way, what we call mad rabies, towards the time of near death. Rabies is a horrible disease. It's a lysovirus that inflames the brain. With canines, canids, it tends to affect their ability to swallow and their ability to eat, which actually drives them to the point of madness because they're starving to death. At that point, the animal is mostly a goner, That's where, tragically, I think, like with the incident of your friend, where biting incidents tend to happen. But rabid animals could look perfectly normal in some cases. But go ahead, my apologies.
Thank you, Frank, and if you think Frank could talk, you see nothing yet. Your question is, no.
You're Italian, that's why.
Your question was, how can you tell if they're rabid? Well, it's basically foaming at the mouth, walking like you're drunk, basically. The only way we're going to test for rabies, and that's through the Rockland County Health Department, is through decapitation of the animal. The only way we're going to test it if it bites somebody. So not every animal that has to get destroyed is going to be tested.
Right.
We're concerned about the health. If a person or your family pet gets bit, it's definitely getting destroyed. It's going to go to the health department, decapitate it, sent to Albany. They'll test it. 24 hours, we got the results.
Right.
You're going for rabies shots or not. And they are not in the stomach. That was your great-grandfather. I'm getting old.
Nah, you look great.
Used to be my grandfather.
You look great. We're like Abbott and
But
Costello.
it's not in the belly. That's an old wives' wise tale, okay? It's around the initial bite, then it's what? You may know. Do a pat
I think
every
it's
2
only like
weeks.
3 or 4 shots, right?
It's a series of shots. You get the first day, then you go 2 weeks, then you go the 21st day after you were bit.
I'm more worried about getting the flu.
Yeah, so.
Very bad.
And I don't know about you two, but I'm inoculated for rabies, and there is a.
That's how you kept your hair.
That's how, yeah, it's all mine. Jeez. I don't know how I kept it, so thank you.
Oh, wait, this woman over here, we're going to work our way this way. You in the back with the beautiful hat. We're going to work our way this way.
I'm a foreigner. I'm from New Hempstead. And last weekend, we saw...
Hempstead on Long Island?
New Hempstead.
Oh, New Hempstead.
Near
I'm
Spring
sorry.
Valley.
A lot of Hempstead.
I saw, I didn't see anything exactly like that, but it was a very gray animal running like a streak. The tail was out horizontally, even
Well,
longer than those.
You do have 2 species of foxes here in Rockland County. You have the red fox and you have a gray fox, which is gray. It's
A fox
smaller,
rather than a
somewhat
coyote.
smaller than, I'm sorry?
You said a fox rather than a coyote?
Say it again.
Did you say?
No,
it was-
you have 2 species of fox here in Rockland County as well as the coyote. You have the red fox, which sometimes red foxes are not always red. They could be grayish or blackish. Gray foxes are a little smaller than red foxes. They tend to be very uniform in color, very gray. But yes, coyotes can be that color too. I could say it may have been a coyote. It could have been a fox. So it's.
I think my question is, I didn't know as a neighbor whether I should have notified everybody I could. You didn't mention children. You
Officer
said
Walker
other-
will answer that.
You said other dogs, pets, but what about worrying about little kids who play in their backyard?
Right. Listen, like I said, common sense. And as Officer Walker pointed out, incidents with people here locally is next to nothing. That doesn't mean that you should be complacent. I get this a lot, and unfortunately there's a mode of thinking that once coyotes become problematic with pets, they gravitate to possibly being aggressive towards people. I don't agree with that. I've dealt with coyotes that have been accused of being bold, and while I'll admit I'm not the most aesthetic-looking person in the world, they always run from me. So boldness and potential conflicts with people, I pointed out in the slideshow, feeding is the quickest way to having an incident. All incidents other than rabid animals have to do with habitual feeding. I'll be honest with you, and not to scare you, but coyotes are probably laying up in wooded lots in proximity to homes every day with kids playing, and they never once look at those kids as a potential target. And you could always call me.
Should children be told if they go near you, scream and
Yeah,
stop?
kids could do it, even more so, because kids are loud. They have no disrespect, guys. All right, I mean that in the most loving way. All right, kids have a higher octane, so to speak, and that will scare the, yeah, that's a better word, out of the coyote. Don't live in fear. Come on, in this day and age, I have gangs and drugs where I come from. No, Coyotes, it'll be okay. Go ahead, this girl had a question. Does that answer your question? Is that all right?
Her question was about kids as well. Next?
All right, I'm sorry. Did anybody else over here? Well, he raised his hand. I never make a good teacher. I'd just be random.
Could you discuss in a little more detail how to tell the difference between a fox and a coyote and what their different behaviors are?
Right. Well, I turned off my slide show, or else I would definitely show you. I mean, it's, when you're looking like this lovely lady over here, when you see an animal for a split second streaking across a road, foxes, coyotes, and even wolves, your mind plays tricks on you, and it's hard to discern. But there's very real differences between foxes and coyotes. They're not closely related at all. Like I said, coyotes and wolves are actually directly related to each other. Foxes, even though they're within the dog family, totally separate branch of the family. Foxes are much smaller in most cases, and like I said, there's two species of fox here in Rockland. The gray fox, which a lot of people probably see it more often, but they think it's a cat, because, from a distance. And then the proverbial red fox, which beautiful animal with the fluffy tail and black legs, and in many cases, very reddish color. They could be a cross fox, which maybe have black in their coloration. I've seen red foxes that are almost blondish or creamish. Red foxes have a very obvious tail, all right? The tail on the red fox is very pronounced, very big, unless it's in the summer when they molt and they lose a lot of that fur, or if they're suffering from sarcoptic mange like the coyotes and they're practically hairless on their tail. But they have a very large pronounced tail. The tail is, in many cases, almost as long as their body, which might explain what this woman saw with that long streaking tail behind this animal running. Most likely it was a fox. Coyotes could have a long, very fluffy tail as well, but they stand much taller, and they basically look like wolves, miniature wolves. So that's the major difference between foxes and coyotes. I have a great slide, of which I'm not going to take too much of your time, because then I got to load that up again, of the comparison between a red fox and a coyote. Red foxes have certain physical attributes that partake to their mousing behavior. They have very long hind legs, which if you saw them parallel, you would see it. This way they could pounce much better, where coyotes are really built like a dog. Just they're very uniform with their legs and stuff. So we'll get this lady here. Oh, I'm sorry. You?
Okay. I just want to be clear. You are saying that if you make noise, if you see one of these animals, you make noise, they're going to go away?
Right. Well, what I'm saying too, I mean, there are coyotes that may, become overly conditioned to more passive deterring, like with the noise. After a while, some coyotes might not be fazed by it. Like I was telling Pat earlier this evening, coyotes in Rockland, much like in Westchester and in New York City, they hear traffic noise on a regular basis. They hear people talking on a regular basis, kids laughing and playing. All right, so they could be desensitized to those sounds. But what I was saying before is many of the times people rarely, if ever, yell at them. So the meager yelling in most cases is enough to put them off. And then if once you go back inside your house or in the middle of the night, coyotes might come back. You're not going to deter them from frequenting the area. It's just teaching them to avoid us, teaching them to avoid our pets. It's doable. They're very trainable, if you could say. This woman right here. And by no means, get somebody to do it for you if you don't want to do it. I don't expect you to do it. But blast music at them, throw something at them. It's simple.
Okay, so we have, quite a few coyote-type animals in our neighborhood, and most of them are small, like you said. But on 2 occasions, I saw one one or two, that looked as big as a German Shepherd.
Right.
Would that be a coyote too?
Well, yeah, they stand very tall the coyotes here in the Northeast, as opposed to coyotes, say, in the Southwest, in the desert, which are fairly small compared to our coyotes. But even though they stand tall, they are still very light-bodied animals. Like I said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the reason why I reached out was because of the news report in the beginning of December that filmed a coyote locally that really was not behaving abnormal from what I saw in the video. The report went on to say that they were totally convinced the animal was 75 pounds. It was not.
This one looked like
Right.
75 pounds.
They may look that way, but
Yeah.
they are not. They're very light animals. So.
Can I ask one last question while I got you here? On a couple of occasions, I've seen a smaller coyote when I'm out walking my dog at night, but we stay pretty close to the house when I'm
Right.
walking, but I can see them up on the street.
Okay.
In that case, when they're like, like a good
Yell at
distance
them.
away, yell at them anyway?
Yell at them. Well, if they're too far away,
Well, I
don't
mean,
even
they're-
bother. I mean,
they're-
how far away?
Well, further than from here to that corner of the room.
Oh, all right.
I
Well,
mean, they're not on top of us, but.
right. Well, you could still yell at them at that point. You don't want them to get too close.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, like I said, it's either if it's a young animal, it could be out of curiosity. But in the case of being territorial and aggressive towards a dog, at that point, make sure they stay that distance. Yelling at them, throw something at them. Be confident. There's a lot of dog training that goes into it too. Coyotes are animals of dominance and submission, much like wolves and dogs. They see alpha status, so and like I was saying before, a lot of these conflicts happen because people wind up withdrawing and the more coyotes see that, the more they say, hey, these two-legged animals, I always was supposed to fear them, but they seem more afraid of me. So I've seen coyotes I've seen foxes. It's almost funny, foxes being much smaller. Foxes do the same. In fact, there was a funny story in Westchester again, where these gray foxes learned that the people that walked their dogs were so afraid of them, these little animals, that every time the fox made an appearance, people would run. So the foxes learned that, hey, you know what? We could scare these people off, no problem. I mean, this is an 8-pound animal. All right, so the gray fox would come out every time it heard the ching, 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 ching of the chain, and these people would panic and run. And one woman was so panicked, she wound up injuring her. This is a true story. Google it. She wound up injuring herself, breaking her collarbone, and because of this 8-pound animal. So they are very visual. They learn very quickly, and you could teach them otherwise. I'm sorry, I lost track.
Sure.
This woman in the pink.
Right, but before that, just Pat, maybe you could, I'm going to ask Pat just to explain if they are a nuisance and they are becoming problematic, and some of the things that we've done and will do if you report that. Pat, go ahead.
I am always available if you have a concern, if there is a coyote spending too much time in your yard, around a school, anything that's not typical of their behavior. So reach out to me and I come out, we assess the situation. If it requires trapping, we have a trapper that we have available that does that for us.
Right, and just not too long ago, we actually had a situation where we brought the trapper out because of coyotes that were reported near a school.
Yes, and we didn't have any luck.
Right.
But by all means, an animal that's a danger to the public has to be removed. I'm totally in agreement.
Right, and Pat, just the other thing you could also explain is when the report is done, because it's important, we want to, we have those 485 reports to the police in 2017. Only 13 of those, or 12 of those were coyotes, 13 were bear, and Pete, how many were foxes?
32 were
Foxes. So we seem to be getting a lot more reports about foxes than about.
Actually more
right,
common than
right.
coyotes.
Right.
They require fewer territory to pursue.
Right.
So it's natural that foxes would be more common than coyotes. Coyotes are less numerically on the landscape. Part of the tragedy why these. Oh, I'm sorry. That's all right. Did you have a?
But just the point was just, Pat, what happens, it's important for us to make sure that we get the report, if these animals are becoming something that's a nuisance in a particular area, what happens with that report, and at what point does that go up the chain? Explain how that happens.
When there's a conflict and there's a concern for safety, we do come out, and if it happens when I'm not working, the police respond. And then if they feel that it could be a situation that needs trapping or some information, they refer it to me, and then we create a complaint that is followed up. And calling and giving me the sightings of the coyote, I do appreciate it, but sometimes people call, they don't leave a phone number, and my phone at the office actually goes over to my cell phone, so sometimes when you do leave a message, you're not speaking clearly, and sometimes that creates a problem in me getting back to the person.
Hi, I'm a retired teacher who lives 3 houses from our regional school for special needs youngsters and young people up to age 21, 6 feet tall, who may not have language. Definitely developmentally challenged human beings, some of whom are pathologically afraid of dogs. We won't even talk about coyotes,
Right.
who, when they are upset, can injure teachers unwittingly. You know, these are youngsters with many challenges. Pat has been out and tried to work with us. Pat, the neighborhood is full of coyotes again. You know that one of the BOCES administrators was looking for scat every morning. I've seen the coyotes 3 houses away from my house away. I know that the Serpers on Strawtown hear them howling nightly. My fear, once again, is for these children who and young people, because 21 is the body of a 6-foot man with an extremely challenged mind. Is there any alternative to trapping? I mean, and you have, just to give you the picture, you will have, sometimes you have a teacher or an aide one-to-one with some of these young people, and sometimes sometimes pushing in an adult carriage, or sometimes walking with them, sometimes, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 with one
Right.
aide. We have a difficult situation, and my feeling is, for everyone's safety, there shouldn't, and we have coyotes
Right.
and
Well,
foxes,
I-
and we have them in 2s or 3s.
Right. Well, listen, I applaud what you do. You're definitely heroic in
I'm
taking.
not one of their teachers,
Right.
but I sympathize
Right.
as a retired teacher.
Like I was telling the woman earlier, the threat to the public, regardless, is highly minimal. As far as being inundated with coyotes, you most likely have the same family group that you're seeing over and over again. The school may strategically be part of their territory. You don't have hundreds of coyotes in Clarkstown. I could attest to that. Right. The threat is minimal. And again, wait a second. And again, if these kids are supervised naturally, have chaperones, those chaperones could do the same deterring that I advised before. Right. Yeah, you go ahead. Happy to help. I'll deter them too. I'm happy to come out.
I'm sorry, your name? Doctor, Officer Padilla, I'm going to try to answer it the best I can.
And we've met with Pat, and she's a lovely person. Different families, coyotes, one coyote was killed.
I understand your concern. I understand the adult. I understand the situation, what's going on here. One of the problems is that the state of New York, the Environmental Conservation, does not let us arbitrarily go out and trap animals. We have to follow the state laws. We can't just go out there because they are a nuisance. Another alternative, you can go online. The police officers carry a taser. I carry what's called a dazer, $25. Your school could buy them. You could buy them. A jogger, a bicyclist. You and I can't hear that, but maybe these kids can, because their ears are not as developed as an adult. Officers would be a good point to have them at a domestic when a Rottweiler is answering the door. So that's a nice little investment for your adults and your children. You just squeeze the trigger, a 9-volt battery. You cannot hear it. Animals can. I've had pit bulls do flips on me. But I'm going to tell you, it doesn't work on every animal. It works on deer. I know that. Works on some hunting dogs. Pit bulls. May not work on a Chihuahua. May not work on a coyote. But it's called a dazer with a D, not a taser. That's a police officer's tool. This is my tool. Okay? So it might be an alternative to the trapping, because our hands are tied most of the times.
I thought it was a licensed professional control.
Yes, but we are not allowed to trap just arbitrarily because they are a nuisance. One example is if they're doing damage to property. When did you see a coyote do damage to property? They're ripping the siding off your home? They're destroying your car, keying it? No. Are they defecating, urinating? Is that damage? Well, that's in a court to decide. So look that up, Google that.
Can I also add to that?
And just, Ann, I understand what your concern is, and very keenly. I spent 21 years working with people with developmental disabilities, and I know we've talked about this before. And you're absolutely right. That is a situation where people with cognitive impairment can have very unrealistic fears, and obviously perception is different for them when they encounter certain situations. And just the mere fact that there are a pair of coyotes that are near the school can be something that can be a fearful experience for them, just as if they were out in the community and a dog comes by them when they're out, when they're out in a park, or they're out, on the street or what have you. So we understand that. I know Pat's been, we did try and do trapping there based upon the reports, and we brought in a certified trapper to do this, and unfortunately we were not successful in being able to secure, that coyote. Again, they also move, so, what was there a year or two ago may be somewhere else, and they could be in a different environment. But we'll have a conversation after this, and we'll also have a continuing conversation with the Jesse Kaplan School and with BOCES to see what we can do. And I think everybody that's here, we'll make sure that we get a link to this device that the officer from Orangetown talked about. So if you're interested in getting that, to have it for yourself, it would be a help. Stan, why don't you go? You have a question, and then we'll move.
Yeah, it was basically just a comment. Frank, I have an intimate knowledge of the wildlife in this county and the state, and I appreciate you talking about the coyote all night and not using, I guess, what some of us think is a misnomer, the coy wolf. I know you like the term, but I think that, since the December incident, when it was termed a coy wolf, it spread a lot more fear
No, you're right. It is being used
the minds
in
of people.
negative.
It's a synonymous
right.
name.
Right.
And we've said it's coyote for the last 70 years.
Right.
I am the master instructor in this county for the DEC.
Oh, all right.
So I have an intimate knowledge
totally
of the
with you on
wildlife
that.
in the county. And we
Let's
know
bring
that
wolves back.
the wolves, we both know, are not, I know you want them introduced into the Adirondacks.
Were you planted in this talk? Or?
No, sir, but I represent all the sportsmen in the county.
I'm not
and
opposed.
women.
I'm not opposed to sportsmen.
No, and I realize that, but I think, and I love animals more than I think anybody almost in this room, including you. But it's the misnomer. I think everybody heard the term coy wolf.
I think
there are
I
people
tried,
in this room that
I
have
tried
fought
to,
50-pounders.
Well, I tried to point that out. No, I think I said that over and over again. Like I said, coy wolf is just a moniker. Right. it's a moniker used much like coy dog was at some point, and eastern coyote is a preferable term. Yeah, it is not a distinct species, even though hybridization has interest, lots of scientific studies. But I just wanted to point out to the woman prior, I would certainly be more than happy to help in deterring these animals. The tragedy with trapping, too, is that within, I'm sure the DEC will agree, 6 weeks to several months, other coyotes would be in that area, too. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
I wanted to make a suggestion to the woman who I think is not in the room anymore in the
Right.
pink.
That's who I was talking about.
But also, they can consider fencing. I don't know, if the
I don't know if that's prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
I still feel that the threat, despite them being seen, is minimal. I understand the anxiety, which is why I would gladly help Pat, which I have full faith in and confidence
Yeah.
in deterring. But sometimes the removal is just a Band-Aid effect, where if the natural recolonization of the territory of a rival coyote group, other coyotes would wind up there, and then they'll be doing the same behaviors as the previous family and be complained about. You could deter them, but
So I just wanted to say that I didn't even get to my question yet, but I think what she
Sorry.
was saying is that when these kids just even see the
Right.
coyote,
Right.
they can go crazy
Right.
and get upset.
right.
So
No,
it's
I
not even.
totally sympathize with that. I do understand that. I mean, like I said, the removal of the animals may have a immediate benefit, but there'll be other animals that will come back. Again, I don't want to sound, unempathetic or offensive, but certainly attempt the deterring or keep the kids distracted where they don't see an animal that's far off at the edge of the field. That's the only recommendations I could say. As far as, removing them, it's just a vicious cycle. There'll be others there, and it'll be the same thing all over again. I mean,
My question was basically, can you in a nutshell tell novices like me how to distinguish a coyote from a dog? I thought that coyotes have fairly bushy tails and fairly short coats, whereas dogs, you'll seldom see a bushy, long-haired tail and a short
Yeah,
coat. But is
some-
there anything we can see like
right,
quickly?
I mean, if I'm sure Pat will be better at telling you that if there's any dog that, or assumed to be a dog, loose, that would require animal control to look into if that's someone's pet. And right away, Pat would see that that's not a dog, it would be a coyote. Physically, there are some breeds of dogs that from a distance will look like coyotes. This woman prior said they looked like German Shepherds to her. And, there are many physical differences between a dog and a coyote because one's a wild animal and one is bred for certain tasks through domestication. The domestic dogs. Shepherds are herding dogs. They're very robust and large-boned. Coyotes these coyotes in the east appear very wolfish, no offense with the coy wolf term, which makes them look very shepherd-like. But you could certainly tell the difference between a labradoodle and a coyote, no doubt, right? But some of the more wolfish-looking breeds, it may be difficult to discern for most people at a distance. I mean, myself, Pat, Mr. Padilla, I'm sorry. I know, I know. We're brothers. And my DEC friend over there could discern what would be a wild animal and what would be a domestic animal. But if an animal is off in the distance, it's not much of a concern unless it's someone's pet that's loose. And, I'm sure you're all good, responsible pet owners. Thanks for all coming. Who's leaving? There was somebody else over here. That looks like a fox to me. What was the other picture? Yeah, that's a fox with mange. That's sarcoptic mange. That's a deer. Oh, I know you know that. That's a Sasquatch right there.
There's a question here, sir.
Yeah, no, that's a fox with mange, sarcoptic.
There's a question here, and we'll try and wrap it up maybe after this question, but we'll stick around if anybody else has got questions, but I know it's.
Sure, it's tollless tolls, right? So they're going to charge me no matter what, so. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for coming, and my question is actually, I guess, going to be for both of you, actually. I live around the block from where there was the spotting of the coyote allegedly stalking the woman taking out her garbage. So that made me keenly aware of my own vulnerability, or perceived vulnerability, because I didn't have the advantage of the information I now have. And I walk my dog, who is a large dog, down that route all the time, and also into the many parks here in Rockland County, and always leashed. But it makes me aware now that I might be putting myself and my dog in an environment where we become more heightened likelihood of possibly encountering a coyote. And I have always made it a point of carrying very strong pepper spray with me, in large part because I'm concerned about a possible dog off lead that might run after my dog. Now I know that if I do see a coyote or fox, I'm going to do what I do very well, and that's scream loudly. And that will likely work. But on the off chance that it doesn't, I'm just curious, will my pepper spray, which is from what I understand, a very potent one, would that be an effective deterrent if for some reason that coyote, or even, and Pat, that's why I'm directing it to you as well, an off-lead large dog is approaching my dog, will that be an effective deterrent to either the dog and I can't use the dazer. It sounded like a great idea, but then that's going to flip my dog out, who's
Well,
at the end of my leash.
Well, what you could also carry is, I'm an avid kayaker, I carry an air horn with me.
It won't hurt. I've had years and decades of practice, as my husband will tell you. So I'm just wondering.
Actually, the spray, I'm not a fan of.
Yeah.
Because if it's windy,
I understand.
if you panic and you can't spray it, I'm a fan of carrying a towed umbrella.
At some point you're so overweight that your walk becomes so unpleasant. I really don't want to have to carry a backpack.
No, but a towed umbrella, you can actually hook it up to your, to your belt. The
Bags that you carry, I know you carry.
You betcha. I never is she off a leash unless she's in my fence in the backyard.
well,
Could you scream for us?
but honestly, the towed umbrella, because these animals are of the dog family, and if a dog, one of our own dogs, fails a temperament test, it's usually the umbrella that they fail. And if you think about it, even if you panic, you could always use the umbrella to jam it, hit the animal in the nose, jam it in their mouth. And if you do pop it open, it creates a distraction for that animal, and it gives you the ability to back away safely.
You have like a shield that protects you. I personally think bear spray may be a little too powerful for an animal the size of a coyote, or especially a fox. And these are animals that depend on olfactory. You don't want an animal that is damaged, might become a problematic animal. With bears, it's often used as a last resort, and a bear is a much larger. If it makes you feel confident, I think I'm Italian too, we talk loud. If it makes you feel confident walking with it, even Pat's advice and Reg's advice is very sound and excellent, much better advice.
We'll finish one last question here, and then we'll wrap it.
One really quick follow-up. I'm out with my dog. I see the coyote way, up on the street
By
there.
the door
like
again?
we were talking about before that. Now, if I start yelling at the coyote, my dog is gonna start barking like crazy.
That's
Is that
good.
a good thing?
That's good that the dog, because, they, not to be, jokingly, but dogs understand dogs. I know it sounds comical, but, dogs barking is a territorial response, is an aggressive response. And the coyote will get that. But most importantly, the coyote has to associate the human, which they have an innate fear of, with the dog. The
Okay.
dog, like with most dogs, they'll be territorial with. Dog vocalizing is fine, but the important thing is that it associates you with the dog, and
Okay.
it makes that avoided, so.
Thank you.
Great, so I think that's going to kind of wrap it up. We'll stick around, and I want to ask Stan to come up too, because Stan is an environmental educator, hunter educator with DEC. So if you could come on up too, and he can answer any questions too. But I want to thank everybody for coming. I think tonight, the purpose of tonight really was to provide information and try and dispel some of the fear. And I think you got some practical information. And again, if there are incidents or issues or there are animals, whatever they might be, whether it's stray dogs, stray cats, coyotes, fox, the occasional bear, that might be in your neighborhood, please let us know. Let Pat know, let the police department know, so that we can kind of address it. Because we don't really have a total census. We don't really know how many of these animals live here and exist here. And what I started off by saying in my comments as we opened this evening was, we live in an area, and Stan and John, these guys can attest to this, that we live in an area that's loaded with wildlife, and loads of deer and everything else, and there's a whole ecosystem. So we're not sure what number of animals we actually have within our town or within the region. But what I can tell you is it's plentiful, and it appears to be growing within our area, and that's a good thing. But it brings fear and it brings concern. And hopefully tonight you got some more information, and sign the sign-in list, and we'll make sure that we provide more information to you. But if you've got a question, you've got a concern, call my office, call Animal Control, call the police department. That's for those of you who live in Clarkstown. I'm not taking responsibility for the other towns. But for the town of Clarkstown, if you've got a concern, call my office, 639-2050. Pat, what's your number again?
639-5888.
Or the Clarkstown Police Department, 639-5800 to get to dispatch. And let us know. And I do anticipate, I actually was talking with a reporter today, and I said, I do anticipate we're probably going to get a spike in reports, but that's a good thing, because if there are examples of animals that are going to be problematic or in close proximity to like a school or there are issues with, we need to know about that. But keep in mind, take this away as you leave tonight. It's been 5 years since a coyote attacked a pet in the town of Clarkstown. 5 years since the last report in our police department. We don't have incidents like this, so while there might be some fear, we need to make sure that you also report to us, so that we can make sure that that incident number stays 0 for the next number of years. Thank you all for being here, and we'll all be up here for questions.